Welcome to SEFAA Soundbites, your quick pulse on all things multifamily, brought to you by the Southeast Florida Apartment Association. The Southeast Florida Apartment Association podcast and the views and information shared in this episode are provided solely for general guidance, informational, and educational purposes only, primarily for professionals in the multifamily housing industry. The views expressed by hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Southeast Florida Apartment Association. This podcast does not constitute legal, financial, or operational advice. Listeners should follow their own company's policies and standard operating procedures, and, when needed, seek professional counsel before acting on any topic discussed. So, grab your coffee, plug in, and let's get prepared. This is SEFAA Soundbites.
Welcome back to SEFAA Soundbites, the podcast bringing you short but powerful conversations in the multifamily industry. I'm Sara Cox, SEFAA president, and today we're doing a deep dive into something some may find daunting but essential: legislative affairs. I'm joined by three incredible experts who are at the front lines of advocacy for our industry: Kelly Mallette, SEFAA Government Affairs Director; Amanda White, Vice President of FAA, and Ryan McCain of Barfield, McCain, Ayoub, PA, and SEFAA's legal counsel. Together, we'll unpack how legislative affairs affects your communities, what role SEFAA plays in governmental affairs, and most importantly, how you, our members, can get involved. Whether you're brand new to advocacy or already well-versed in the issues, this episode is all about legislative affairs demystified. Let's get started. So to kick things off, Kelly, I'd like to ask you in the simplest terms, what do we mean when we say legislative affairs in the context of the multifamily industry?
Well, I think we mean anything and everything government, right? SEFAA is your advocate before local government bodies and works through the FAA as the affiliate to also monitor state legislative affairs and, of course, work through the National Association to focus on federal issues. So that can be anything that a government body considers that affects the apartment industry.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. From the legal perspective, what compliance issues do members need to watch out for when new laws pass?
I would say advocacy is a rather broad concept that involves promoting a cause or a policy to influence a public opinion or decision-making in many arenas. So you can see this in the courtroom setting where I, as an attorney, would be advocating and presenting arguments of facts and law in support of my client, trying to influence a judge's decision. Or in the legislative setting, that's where we as members of the Apartment Association are advocating the industry's policies with our state and local lawmakers. Lobbying, I would say, is a more specific form of advocacy that involves direct interaction with legislatures to influence legislation and asking lawmakers to take a particular stance on bills or policies. And a political action committee is organizations that collect and distribute funds to support candidates or legislation that's aligned with their goals. These are regulated entities such as FAA's APAC or the National Apartment Association's APAC that pool voluntary monetary contributions to support elected officials. There are formal reporting and compliance laws governing PACs. So that's the distinction between advocacy, lobbying, and political action committees.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that explanation. Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you and see if you can walk us through how a bill becomes a law in Florida and how FAA and SEFAA contribute to that.
Sure. In a nutshell, a bill is typically introduced by a member of the legislature, either in the House or in the Senate, and then the bill is ultimately assigned to committees. And then the bill must go through a legislative committee process, which typically involves multiple committee hearings in the chamber that it originates in. And from there, the bill is actually amended during that process in response to feedback from other stakeholders like the Florida Apartment Association or even other lawmakers. So ultimately what that means is that the bill wording is tweaked during the committee process to address issues or concerns that may have come up as the bill is being debated. Then once the bill is on the floor in either chamber, the leadership of that chamber must make the decision to pull the bill up for a vote on either the House or Senate floor. And then from there, the bill must ultimately be approved by the other chamber in an identical form for the bill to ultimately make its way to the governor. So therefore, if there's a scenario where the House and Senate do not agree on how to move forward on a particular piece of legislation, it's not uncommon to see the same bill bounce back and forth between the House and the Senate until they can ultimately agree on how to move forward with that particular bill. And then ultimately, once both chambers pass an identical piece of legislation, it is sent to the governor, and he has the option to sign the bill, veto it, or he can even allow that bill to become law without his signature.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Kelly, what would you say are the top 3 legislative issues currently affecting the multifamily housing in Florida?
Well, I think the number one issue facing the multifamily housing industry in Florida is really the lack of affordable housing in Florida. The legislature has tried over the past several years through the Live Local Act to create an environment at the state and local level to encourage the development and availability of additional affordable housing. So I think that's really the number one issue is that act working? Could it work better? Is it impacting the state and making the difference in terms of increasing the supply of affordable housing for Floridians? So I think that's sort of the number one issue, the scarcity of affordable housing. And of course, the various things the legislature has done, the state legislature has done to impact that. And secondly, I would say an issue that I anticipate being at the top of the agenda next year is property taxes. There's a lot of concern amongst Floridians about the rising cost of property taxes. And the governor has actually discussed eliminating property taxes in their entirety for homesteaded property owners. I think what's critical for the multifamily industry is ensuring that policymakers understand that anything that they do to reduce property tax burdens on homesteaded properties could ultimately increase a property tax burden on a non-homesteaded or commercial property. I think they really need to look at the property tax issue in a wholesale form and fashion to ensure that, you're not impacting commercial property owners in an unfair way. And then I would say, thirdly, each and every year we see legislation filed that would negatively impact the apartment industry. And several years ago, we were able to pass an important law that preempted all of the authority to govern multifamily to the state. So in other words, these could not pass legislation that regulated the apartment industry. The legislature took an affirmative step and clarified that regulation can only be done at the state level. However, we do see both at the local level and at the state level, different proposals that would sort of go against that preemption. So I think that's probably the third biggest issue facing the multifamily industry right now.
Thank you. I am going to turn it over to Amanda to talk a little bit about how SEFAA and FAA help us decide which issues to prioritize each year.
So FAA's legislative platform is actually set by members who are engaged in our advocacy efforts. And so throughout the year, the government affairs team actually seeks feedback from members across the state to determine what topics or issues are ultimately top of mind for the apartment industry and could ultimately be addressed legislatively. And from there, every fall, we send out what we call an advocacy survey, which allows FAA members to rank various issues or topics of significance to the industry and provide feedback on other emerging issues. And then ultimately at the legislative platform meeting, which takes place every year at Inspire, the FAA annual conference and trade show, FAA members formally determine our legislative priorities for the upcoming year based on the results of the survey and then feedback that we collect at that meeting. And once our priorities are selected, the FAA government affairs team and lobbying team works closely with FAA's legislative committee, which there are members from SEFAA on that committee, and the government affairs council, as well as the FAA executive committee on preparing bill language and often working with legislators throughout the legislative process as well.
That's great. And thank you guys so much for helping provide this baseline. I think a lot of people just have this baseline of curiosity about getting more involved. And I think this is going to really help get people this understanding. So I'd like to shift and look at some real world impacts and examples of how we put this into practice. So I am going to start with Kelly here. If you can talk a little bit about the biggest misconception that members have about advocacy.
I think the biggest misconception is that members think, oh, what can I do? I'm just one person. How can I make a difference? But the fact of the matter is that participation in government affairs, both at the affiliate level, participating in the conferences, participating in Impact, participating in NAA advocacy days, really does make a difference. One voice in the conversation can have a meaningful impact on a goal. And we've seen that in practice when a member who has a property in a certain legislative district discusses the impact of legislation on their property specifically, that connection between the legislator and the local member can really be impactful. Legislators like to hear from their local constituents, both at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. Additionally, I think participating in the platform meetings and things like that truly make a difference in terms of refining priorities, defining and refining what we'll do and what we'll bring forward. So biggest misconception is I'm just one voice. I can't have an impact. The fact of the matter is every voice can have an impact, and one person's participation can really make a difference in an outcome.
I have to admit, Kelly, that was me. When I first started to get involved, I didn't think that my voice mattered. I didn't think that the legislators really, frankly, cared what maybe I had to share. But boy, was I wrong, right? After attending the conference, it is one that I refuse to miss every year. It is such a great way to connect with the teams in the Capitol, right? Whether it's locally in Florida or at the national level. As you mentioned, they love meeting with our teams, hearing what we have to say. They don't always agree, but that's okay because we're there to help educate them and explain why it's a benefit to SEFAA and the local areas. And so it has become one of my favorite things that I was honestly afraid of for so long. And so I am glad that I took the nudge and jumped in because it has been such a rewarding experience. So that's been really awesome. So, Amanda, can you share a recent legislative win that SEFAA and FAA have been a part of?
Sure. So in 2025, FAA was proud to champion legislation that amended Chapter 83, which is the Landlord-Tenant Act here in Florida, to allow for electronic delivery of notices under Chapter 83. So as a result of this change, notices that used to have to be posted on the resident's door or sent via mail can now be delivered via email. So this was a really positive change, a modernization of the Landlord-Tenant Act. And so FAA members, as well as SEFAA members, traveled to Tallahassee during our legislative conference, also known as Impact, which is our annual lobby day, and ultimately talked to legislators about this issue and why we needed to modernize the law to allow for electronic delivery of notices. We also had FAA members from across the state that sent letters and emails to lawmakers, encouraging them to support the bill as it moved through the legislative process. In addition, several members provided feedback that was used to address lawmaker questions during committee meetings or one-on-one meetings with lawmakers. And even several of our attorney members from across the state, Ryan included, were very involved in the drafting process of this legislation. So this was really a team effort from start to finish, with all the boots on the ground in Tallahassee helping us educate lawmakers on this important issue. And so thanks to all of that engagement, this legislation was actually passed with very strong bipartisan support in both chambers, and it's now law here in the state of Florida.
That's so great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And on the flip side, what would be a good example of a harmful bill that the apartment industry was able to help stop or improve the language before it became a law?
That's a great question. So a good example is that, sometimes in the legislative process, a bill, even with good intentions, can have challenging impacts from an operational perspective on the apartment industry. And a recent example of this is actually the flood disclosure bill from last legislative session. So this bill made a number of changes, including requiring flood disclosures for rental properties under certain conditions. And in the event the disclosure requirements were not met, the resident could ultimately break their lease without penalty and recover prorated rent. While this may seem reasonable on its face, in practice, there were some concerns that the language that was originally in the bill could ultimately allow a resident to collect that prorated rent before they had fully vacated the property and removed their belongings. And so FAA and the apartment industry, we were able to work very collaboratively with the bill sponsors to get language in the bill to address this issue before it ultimately was passed and signed into law. So that's a really great example of how sometimes, even if a bill has great intentions, there can be unintended consequences from an operational perspective, which is why it's so important for the apartment industry to be actively engaged and monitoring legislation, even if it's not our priority legislation, just other bills moving through the process.
Thanks, Amanda. That's so helpful. And Ryan, sort of in that vein, from a legal perspective, what compliance issues do members need to watch out for when new laws pass?
I would say one of the most common pitfalls that I see is clients not staying educated on the timing and compliance obligations of these new laws. So once a new law is signed, there's often a short implementation window and your properties need to adapt quickly. So that might mean updating lease forms, updating disclosure language, internal procedures that need to be implemented from the corporate office to the on-site team. And we saw this recently with exactly what Amanda just discussed, the new electronic notice law and separately the flood disclosure law. So both of these laws were passed around the same time, but had different effective dates on when they became law. And that's very important. The electronic notice bill became effective on July 1. However, we saw some members or clients confused in sending out electronic notices prior to that date, thinking that it was already effective just because it was passed and signed by the governor a few months prior. However, that effective date is very important, whereas the flood disclosure law did not become effective until October 1. So it's really important to stay educated, stay up to date on these new laws when they become effective. Any information that the local apartment association or the state apartment association provides, you want to read that information, contact your local attorney to stay updated.
That's a great point, Ryan. And I would say for me, working with Bozzuto, we have a great internal team that helps us track those changes. And so I would recommend if your company is perhaps a bit smaller or doesn't track the issues the same way, certainly feel free to share that with your internal teams so that they can help you with that, connect with the legal teams, with the Ryans of the world to help us make sure that we're staying compliant and making sure that we are rolling them out correctly and in a timely fashion so that we're not violating the law by implementing it too soon or doing something that's just a little bit off. So a great way to just continue to keep a look at it and work with your internal teams. It's all very exciting when it rolls out. And so we want to make sure that we're complying correctly and making sure that we're rolling it out together. So I am going to turn it back over to Kelly and ask, why is it important for SEFAA members to stay engaged with both state and national advocacy efforts?
Well, I think it's important because of a couple things. Number one, the state legislature meets every year in a 60-day legislative session. And of course, the Landlord Tenant Act that Amanda mentioned already, Chapter 83, is governed by the state legislature. So there are proposals each and every year by the state that could potentially impact multifamily owners and the multifamily industry. And those things typically happen in that 60-day legislative session. Things that happen at the state level typically happen much faster than they do at the federal level. So I think it's really important to stay engaged at the state level because there's a session each year, legislation's being proposed, it's being considered, it's moving through the process. And often things move very quickly. At the federal level, it's important to stay engaged as well, because again, there are many issues. And of course, they may be very, very different than sort of just the Landlord Tenant Act as governed by the state, right? The federal government has lots of things that they consider, like the Section 8 voucher program, which they oversee. And I know the National Association has been advocating for changes in that program for several years. Additionally, there are oftentimes administrative actions that could impact the multifamily industry that are proposed at the federal level. So while that may move slower, there's sort of a more constant flow of issues that are being proposed and a more constant flow of issues that you have to monitor.
I think this is a great segue into membership and member involvement, taking these real world impacts and then showing how we can continue to be involved throughout the year. Amanda, for members that are listening who are still feeling a little bit intimidated by politics, how can they start getting involved?
It's a great question. I would say start local. It can be intimidating to come up to Tallahassee for the first time and meet with state lawmakers, but it's just as easy to go to your local city council or county commission chambers and make a difference with SEFAA as well, and kind of dip your toes in the water a little bit as you prepare to come up to our state capitol and do it on a larger scale at the state level. So start local, get engaged with SEFAA's legislative committee. Stay engaged in, if they're meeting with local lawmakers, volunteer. At the end of the day, as we've already discussed, that lawmakers want to hear from you. They want to hear your story. They want to hear about your business. And at the end of the day, they care about how a policy change that they are making, whether it's locally at, the city or county level, or even at the state level, they want to know how that's going to impact you, your business, and the residents you serve. So there's nothing more powerful than your voice and sharing those stories with lawmakers. So I would encourage you first to start local. Then I would encourage you to come to Impact, which is our annual legislative conference in Tallahassee every year. Typically happens in February. You can look for the dates on the FAA website at faahq.org. And then last but certainly not least, I would encourage you to invest in APAC, our Apartment Political Action Committee. It's ultimately how we build relationships with lawmakers, both at the local level through SEFAA and SEFAA's advocacy, as well as at the state level with FAA. So we use APAC to invest in candidates who ultimately are going to take the apartment industry into account as they're making policy decisions. So I encourage you to give to APAC as well.
I know I've made my contribution, and I think everyone on the screen has today too. So we appreciate that. I would encourage too that if you are still feeling a little bit intimidated or unsure about the process, please feel free to reach out to the SEFAA board, someone that you're familiar with. I personally would be happy to chat with anyone offline about it. It can feel that way coming in, but the relationships that you build within the industry and the impact that we do make is so important and so valuable that I can't say that I've met anyone that regretted the experience of participating in a conference and meeting legislators and going through that process. You may find that it's not your favorite thing to do. I doubt it, but it's a great experience to try. And once you get more involved, I think you'll really see why it's so important. Kelly, when we look at the national level at the Advocate Conference, why should our members plan to attend that as well? And what would they expect to find there?
Well, first of all, they can expect to be really, really well prepared. Much like our state association, our national association does an excellent job in defining priorities and helping to prepare members to advocate on behalf of those priorities. So you can count on some good information sessions that will help you be well prepared to discuss the issues that the Congress is considering right now that impact the multifamily industry. 2, you can expect to wear out your shoes walking from office to office. Obviously, the home of our House of Representatives and U.S. Senate is much bigger than our local bodies or even state legislature, but it's really important to get to those member offices. So our members can expect to have really good meetings with congressional members and congressional staff about those priorities. Members of Congress rely on their staff tremendously to help them prepare to vote on issues. So I think that spending the time with that congressional staff is critical, and our members can expect to do a lot of that when visiting DC.
That's great. Ryan, I know you've attended both of the conferences in the past, the Impact and Advocate. What were some of your biggest aha moments after these events? And what would your advice be for any newbies that are interested in participating?
I would say my biggest aha moment happened very early in my career. I've been doing this 19 years now, and I started at the local level with SEFAA, but I never went to Tallahassee for a few years. And once I started going to the FAA legislative platform meetings and then going to Tallahassee, it absolutely blew my mind that these bills that we were working on would become law and change the Residential Landlord Tenant Act. And once I saw that, I was all in. I wanted to go to every single event, and I just couldn't believe that the impact that our association has on this industry. You know, my advice is kind of echoing what Amanda said. You know, you don't have to be a political expert to have influence. You just need to be willing to share how legislation impacts your community to make a difference. And these lawmakers, they genuinely do want to understand. When you're sitting in there face to face with them in these one-on-one meetings, you could see that they are invested and they genuinely do want to understand how their decisions play out in the real world. So those one-on-one conversations is where policy gets shaped. And additionally, I think even if you show up and just listen, learn, and participate when you can, when you're a newbie, it's an incredible experience.
Absolutely. And I know from these last few years that I've attended, when we have new people join us, we encourage you to sit back and listen, right? As you do that and you join your first couple of meetings, I think people tend to surprise themselves that they do know what they're talking about. A question gets asked, they're like, I do know the answer to this. I want to jump in. I want to participate. We've talked about today the electronic notice. When I was meeting with folks last year, you know, they asked the question, why would I want to do this? Why is this important? Explaining some of the risks that our associates face when they have to go out on site and deliver paper notice, or keeping up with technology. If a lease can be legally binding as an electronic signature, why would it not then be legally binding to send a notice in that same way, and educating them on things that they just don't think about because it's not their day job. It's our day job and our chance to help educate them on that. So as you get into it and understand it, I think, again, you just surprise yourself with, oh, I can answer this question. I know this. It's not something that should trip you up. And if it does, then there's other people in the room that can help you and support you through that process. And it makes it extra meaningful, I think. Overall, throughout the year, you know, Amanda touched on getting involved on the local level. And so when we think about the different events that SEFAA hosts throughout the year, we have several fundraisers. This last year, we had a cornhole event. We had a jail and bail fundraiser where we bail different management company members, and we use these opportunities to raise funds for the different advocacy for APAC and NAAPAC. So we're going to shift and talk a little bit about that and why that's important. So Amanda's, for our members who are not familiar, what exactly are APAC and NAAPAC?
These are the political action committees. APAC is your state political action committee. It stands for Apartment Political Action Committee. And NAAPAC is the PAC at the federal level. So APAC here at the state level helps us elect local and state candidates who are going to take the apartment industry into consideration when making decisions. So when we make a contribution to a candidate's political committee or their campaign, it gives us an opportunity to meet with them one-on-one. It gives us an opportunity to build rapport with them over the years, because oftentimes, you know, folks are already fundraising for their next election cycle shortly after they're elected to office. So it allows us to, you know, get to know them over the years, meet with them one-on-one, and share the apartment industry's concerns. And that same process happens at the federal level. So by supporting both APAC and NAAPAC, you are ensuring that the industry has a voice in the elections process locally, at the state level, and then at the federal level through NAAPAC, to ensure that the industry's concerns are taken into consideration before laws are made.
Thank you so much for that explanation. And what about the political action committees? Why are they critical to advancing our advocacy goals?
It's a great question. So political action committees ultimately allow FAA to play a powerful role in the elections process. So when I first started here at FAA, we were not even breaking the 200,000 mark for the funds we raised every year. Now we are crossing the 400,000 mark. So the more money we raise with APAC, the more influence we can have in the elections process. And I know Kelly might have some additional insight to share, but FAA over the years has grown tremendously our PAC. And with that, we have grown our influence over the elections process. So I would say now, as a result of APAC becoming as strong as it is, and that's really thanks to all of you who are listening, who make your APAC contribution every year, you've allowed the Florida Apartment Association to play a role in every key legislative race across the state, as well as countless races at the city and county level, and even races at the cabinet level. Think the governor's office, the CFO, all of those folks play a role in regulating the apartment industry in some way. And we are now making an impact in all of those races. And Kelly, I don't know if you have anything to add on that front.
I tend to agree strongly with everything you've said. Impacting the contributions to the PAC are really, really significantly important because they help show our leadership that we are a part of the process, right? We have friends on both sides of the aisle that run campaigns. And to run campaigns, you have to send mail and you have to do TV commercials and you have to do radio commercials and you have to do social media. And legislators, county commissioners, they rely on contributions to run campaigns. And so naturally, supporting folks who are supportive of your agenda can make a tremendous difference in ensuring that they return as a member to the body that they're seeking election or re-election to, and also to ensuring that as they move through their journey in a legislature or county commission, as they consider issues that impact the multifamily industry, they remember that FAA or SEFAA or your local affiliate, they remember that time that they spent with you. They remember that contribution that you gave. They remember your thoughts on policies impacting your industry. And they view you as a thought leader in that space. And they view you as someone who, your goal is really to get them to, before I do this, let me check with SEFAA. Let me check with FAA. And you know what? Often they do. So that participation in the political process helps to advance your agenda, helps to get your voice heard, and really helps sustain friendships among legislators and government officials.
A great example of, FAA growing its political influence in the elections process is really when you start getting noticed by other groups that may or may not agree with what the industry is trying to do. And so over the last several years, our PAC has really become a target for folks to call out what a big splash we make in various races. So it's not uncommon to read a news article during the election season that actually quotes, APAC supporting candidates in various races across the state and noting how much money we have contributed to the elections process. So that is a really great sign of how much we've grown our influence with APAC, which means that we're just making a greater impact in Tallahassee and our state capital as well.
Kelly, what would you say is the easiest way for our listeners to support APAC and NAAPAC today?
Make your APAC contribution. Participate in events that support APAC. I think it's really easy to contribute to those entities.
And if someone has never donated before, why would 2026 be the year that they should start?
Well, I think 2026 is a great year to start because number one, 2026 is an election year, and it's an election year at the state level. And we've had one governor who has been in office for 8 years. So that's a big race. We're going to have a new governor in 2026, and we're going to have new cabinet members. We have a new cabinet member in the office of the chief financial officer that'll be running. And believe it or not, you would say, why does the chief financial officer impact the multifamily industry? Well, the chief financial officer of the state of Florida also acts as the state fire marshal. And from time to time, we have issues related to that. We also have the attorney general. So all of Florida's cabinet races are on the ballot for 2026. We also have state house and senate races and a number of local races. In addition to that, we anticipate quite a robust season in terms of ballot initiatives. The governor and the legislature are prioritizing property tax reform. We don't know what that will look like yet, but we do know that there will be ballot initiatives related to property tax reform on the ballot in 2026. The association will be in a position to take a position on those issues potentially. And in the past, we've participated in support of and in opposition to various ballot initiatives. So 2026 is a great year to get started because it's an election year and because there are so many key critical offices up for election.
Thank you. Ryan, can you talk a little bit about how our members can help amplify SEFAA and FAA's voice at the Capitol?
Amanda and Kelly hit on a lot of this, but I mean, attending fundraising events, encouraging your colleagues and coworkers to get involved and show up and participate themselves, because every contribution and every member who shows up to meet with lawmakers, no matter the size, helps amplify the industry's voice, in my opinion.
That's great. And if a listener could do just one thing this month to support advocacy, what should it be?
Well, we have the legislative platform meeting coming up within the next month. So attend the legislative platform meeting or attend the APAC event at the Impact Conference on November 5th. I mean, those are both two huge, impactful events that I encourage everyone to attend.
So as Ryan said, please join us at the Inspire Conference in November to join the platform meeting and also the APAC event called Pack the House at the House of Blues in Disney Springs. We would love to see you there. If that contribution is a little bit too high for you, we accept every dollar that you can spare. So as small as a $5 donation, we can accept. We just encourage you to please get involved as best you can and to make the contribution heard throughout the industry. Looking ahead, I'd like you each to just touch on what your vision is for legislative affairs in our industry 5 years from now.
Oh man, I guess I'll go first. We have a lot of big, audacious goals for the association and our advocacy efforts, but I would say one that's top of mind is we want to cross the 500,000 raised in a single year for the Apartment Political Action Committee. So as I said, we're raising over 400,000 from where we stand today, and we really hope within the next 5 years we're crossing that 500,000 threshold. So any contribution you can make, again, can really help us get there. And then I would say the other thing we're really hoping to do is we've been cultivating, key contacts with various state lawmakers. So that might be where you have an existing relationship or you want to develop a relationship with a lawmaker where you live or work in their district. So I can tell you already, we've had a few FAA members who have played absolutely critical roles in getting our legislative priorities across the finish line, because they had a personal relationship with a lawmaker in Tallahassee. So we are looking to grow those key contacts and cultivate new ones within the next 5 years. So that way, when bills are on the floor in either chamber or up for committee, that we have a member within our circles that can actually make a cell phone call to that particular member of the House or the Senate. So, and making those connections really just involves getting to know that lawmaker, going to some of their in-district events and getting them to know your name and know your face. So if you're interested in doing that, definitely let me know. But I would say growing our PAC to over 500,000 a year and then cultivating more of those key contacts with lawmakers would be our two major goals for the next 5 years.
That's great. Kelly, do you want to take it next?
I would have to say that a goal for me would be to, particularly in the next election cycle, as we get a new governor, I think what I would like to see is for FAA to play a role in the transition. Each governor has a transition team, and sometimes those teams are broken up into policy areas. So if I had to choose a great goal for us, it would be for FAA to play a role in the transition team of the next governor. That would be one. I'd also say from a local perspective, we have a election for mayor coming up in a couple of years. I'd like to see SEFAA play a big role in deciding who the mayor should be in Miami-Dade County. That's a strong mayor. So I think kind of looking forward, I'd like to see SEFAA play a really good role in that. And of course, I think also continue to really be a thought leader in terms of things that the legislature is advancing. the Apartment Association under Amanda's leadership has done an excellent job in studying issues that, in presenting them in such a way that it's not really just presenting a bill. It's presenting an idea and a study to support it that really leads to thought-provoking conversations around the state. So not so much as thinking about a specific piece of legislation, but I'd like to see us continue to sort of move the legislature in a direction to where they're thinking about considering things that we help them think about to begin with. Continuing to be that thought leader for the legislature when it comes to housing policy and growing that as part of who we are, I think that would be really wonderful.
That sounds amazing, and I hope that we can all be a part of that. That sounds wonderful. Ryan, what are your thoughts there?
For legislative affairs, ideally, we'll have more proactive. I would say we already do have very proactive collaboration between policymakers and the multifamily industry, especially the past few years, but even more proactive collaboration where legislatures see apartment communities and our association as partners in solving, housing affordability issues, promoting better landlord-tenant relationships. It's funny, Amanda and I were emailing about a concept that we're working on for the legislative platform meeting. And I was asking her, what are some other states doing on this issue? And she's like, there's not much out there because Florida, we are on the cutting edge of a lot of these laws. And it got me so fired up because we truly are, our association. So 5 years from now, I hope that we maintain what we built recently over the past few years. And hopefully we also see the next generation of industry professionals becoming more involved and more engaged in advocacy, because I think that's how we build a sustainable voice for housing in Florida long term.
Absolutely. And that is so exciting. I remember even when we started talking about the electronic notices, there wasn't a lot of precedent out there. And so it's so exciting to be on the forefront of that and have our voice be the precedent that other states use is very exciting. I want to thank you guys all so much for your time today. I know that everyone's very busy and we can get lost in our day jobs, but I think it's so important, so impactful to be able to share with our membership these ideas, demystifying what is really going on at these sessions and meetings, the fundraising that we're doing. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't so important to shaping our industry and the work that we do every day. So we appreciate the contributions that you have made. The consideration of any new contributions that you're willing to make makes such a difference for us in the work that we do. And so we're so excited that you took the time to listen today and share that with us. So don't forget, we have the Impact Conference that is coming up in the spring. If you haven't yet been to Tallahassee, we encourage you to please do that. For the APAC and NAAPAC, there are resources available to make those donations as well. At the conference, you can go to the website, which is SEFAA.org, in order to make your contribution. And we have a lot of different events that you can attend, and we will be asking for contributions at all of those events. So please don't be shy. Ask your questions. Let us know what you have on your mind and how you can participate and what questions you might have about getting more involved. We would encourage you to also check out the SEFAA website for details on our upcoming legislative updates, the SEFAA Insider, and the 2025 Circle of Excellence Awards coming up in November. But that wraps up this episode of SEFAA Soundbites. A huge thank you to Kelly Mallette, Amanda White, and Ryan McCain for demystifying legislative affairs and helping us see how critical advocacy is for our industry. If you found this conversation helpful, please be sure to subscribe to SEFAA Soundbites on Spotify, watch and follow us on YouTube, or listen anytime at www.sefa.org under the podcast section of the Info tab. And remember, you can make a difference. Register for the FAA Impact Conference and join us in Tallahassee. Contribute to APAC and NAAPAC through SEFAA to strengthen our industry's voice. Participate in SEFAA's legislative events and fundraisers throughout the year. Remember, you don't need to be a policy expert to get involved. You just need to show up and speak up. Your voice matters. Don't forget to share this episode with a colleague who's passionate about strengthening our industry. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm Sara Cox, the president of SEFAA, and this has been SEFAA Soundbites, Legislative Affairs Demystified.